Have you ever loved someone without knowing who he really was? Ariel was just an ordinary nurse, quietly working her shifts in the ICU until the day a nameless, comatose man was wheeled into her ward and, unknowingly, into her life. She sang him lullabies from another time, old songs that softened the sterile hum of machines. What she didn't know was that this man, lying silent beneath tangled tubes and blinking monitors, was the hospital's largest shareholder. Ken. A love, born in the dark, survived the light of the truth. Chicago lay shrouded in the chill of early spring, a soft mist veiling the glass windows of St. Augustine Medical Center like a pale curtain. Inside, on the top floor, where time was always short and the machines never slept, Ariel Monroe walked the familiar corridor of the ICU, silent as the start of another night shift. The fluorescent lights cast a ghostly sheen on her caramel-brown skin, making her seem like a quiet spirit moving between those waiting to die and those clawing at the edge of life. She pulled her mask down and exhaled a long breath. The sharp scent of disinfectant and plastic clung to everything. In moments like these, Ariel felt herself dissolving into the air. No one called her name. No one asked how she was. She didn't have to smile for anyone. And yet, in that hush, her heart echoed with a quiet ache. Not everyone is built for nights like these. But Ariel had lived with them for nearly a decade. Once, she had dreamed of becoming a preschool teacher, spending her days laughing with children, a life full of color and light. But life had other plans. Her father died from a sudden stroke. Her mother's hands began to tremble too much to hold a spoon. Hospital bills and prescription costs stretched on like scars that never healed. So Ariel chose medicine, not out of passion, but survival. A way to carry those she loved, even if it meant leaving pieces of herself behind. She dropped a folder onto the nurse's station, loosened her gloves, blinking against the pull of sleep. Around her, the world buzzed in its usual fluorescent. The scuff of a resident's shoes on tile, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the low murmur from the break room. Together, they formed a weary kind of symphony. A long shift always began in false calm and ended in real chaos. Monroe. Jenna's voice was low as she approached the station. The younger nurse held a tablet, her expression tight. New transfer from the ER. Coma patient. Motorcycle accident. They're asking you to take the case. Ariel nodded, unsurprised. When a case needed experience, they called her. But then Jenna's voice dipped further, her eyes narrowing. The file's encrypted, level 2 security. I've never seen that before. Ariel looked up. Encrypted meant someone was hiding something. A high-profile patient? Legal implications? Or maybe just someone rich who wanted silence. No one explained. And Ariel didn't ask. She had learned how to live with the unspoken. She stepped into the patient's room. The man lay still, unmoving. One cheek was smeared with dried blood that hadn't yet been cleaned. His lips were pale, his hair damp with sweat. But what caught her attention more than anything was the absence of identity. No name, no age, no history, just a number on the bed chart, like an item shelved in cold storage. She slid on a fresh pair of gloves and soaked a cloth in warm water, gently wiping the blood from his skin. No one else was in the room, just the steady hiss of the ventilator and the quiet pulse of her own heartbeat. When had it become possible for a man to lie in the city's largest hospital and no one know who he was? She didn't know why her hand lingered longer than usual on his forehead. She wasn't afraid. She just felt hollow. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, knowing there would be no answer. "I'm Ariel. I'll be the one sitting with you tonight." She didn't expect anything, just a reflex, a kindness offered into the void. But then, a sound. A soft groan, barely audible, caught in the man's throat. Instinctive. The sound of someone not yet ready to let go. She looked at him, then back at the coded number. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase him. But Ariel didn't care who he was. He didn't need a name to deserve compassion. He didn't need money to deserve to live. Back at the nurse's station, Jenna was still tapping through the encrypted file, getting nowhere. "They said to keep it sealed for now," she muttered. "Just monitor vitals. Don't ask questions." Ariel said nothing. "Doesn't that strike you as strange?" Jenna asked, voice low. Ariel took a sip of cold coffee. "Around here, strange is just the new normal." The night wore on. Outside the glass windows, the sky began to pale, dawn threading itself into the mist. A cold Chicago morning. Ariel returned to his room. His face was still unconscious, yet something about it held her gaze. Not his looks exactly, but something familiar, as if she'd seen that face before, or maybe the echo of his expression in her own. Each time she asked herself whether life still held meaning. She placed her hand over his. Cold, rough. "You don't have to be afraid," she said softly. "I won't let anyone bargain away your life behind a password." And on that night shift, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else, Ariel, without knowing, reached out and touched the hand of her fate. The sky hadn't fully lightened when the emergency room doors burst open. A team in protective gear rushed a silver-covered gurney down the ICU corridor, their hurried footsteps mirrored in the gleaming white floors. Ariel had just stepped out of her last patient's room, hadn't even taken a sip of coffee, when someone called her name. Monroe, motorcycle accident victim, critical condition, deep coma, coming straight to ICU. She nodded on instinct, turning just in time to see the gurney blur past like a gust of cold wind. Blood, smoke, torn flesh. A large, unmoving body lay under the blanket, and at the head of the bed, instead of the usual patient nameplate, a strange red symbol stood out. H57B. Confidential. Ariel felt her chest tighten. A flicker of unease, intangible but sharp, as if she'd brushed against something she was never meant to touch. The attending physician met her eyes with a look caught between concern and command. "You're taking this case, but listen carefully. Encrypted file. No questions, no digging. Don't write anything in the internal logs. Instructions will come through the secure system." "Reason?" Ariel asked, her voice calm. He gave a dry smile. "Important person. The less you know, the better you sleep." Ariel didn't answer, but she knew she wouldn't be sleeping well tonight. The room was locked from the outside. Only Ariel and 2 other nurses were cleared for access. The man lay silent among the blinking machines, his face bruised, forehead stitched hastily, his right arm swaddled in heavy gauze, likely post-surgery. Ariel tapped into her handheld chart. Everything, medical history, triage notes, emergency procedures, was encrypted. She tried 3 internal codes. Access denied. She turned to the monitors. Heart rate, steady. Intracranial pressure, high. She sighed. This was deep coma. If nothing changed in 72 hours, his chances would plummet. The only instructions were, do not speak his name. Do not ask personal questions. No contact with media. Strange orders. Very strange. Ariel's instincts told her something was off, but not criminal. This man wasn't just another victim from the street. She saw it in his hands. Calloused from the road, yes, but the nails were clean and neatly trimmed. This wasn't someone used to sleeping rough. She gently cleaned the dried blood from his mouth. A long cut traced from his ear down to his jawline. If left unchecked, it would scar badly. She took her time, treating it with a precision that was both clinical and oddly intimate. Then he made a sound, a soft, broken groan. Wordless, but alive. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice low and steady, as if speaking to a spirit, suspended between worlds. "I don't know who you are, and it seems like you don't want me to. But if you want to live, hold on to me." Literally. She squeezed his hand. No response, but he was still warm. That, for now, was enough. In the break room, Jenna watched Ariel set down her thermos. That the secret case? Ariel didn't answer directly. "You ever had a patient without a name?" Jenna shook her head. "Only convicts or politicians. But that guy doesn't really look like either. More like a biker with a taste for expensive leather." Ariel pressed her lips into a line. "I don't think so. His eyes, not the kind you find on the streets." Jenna smirked. "Sounds like someone's falling for the mystery man." "No," Ariel said softly. "I've just learned to observe before I judge." A pause. Then Jenna asked, "Do you think we should know the truth?" Ariel turned toward the window. Dawn was starting to bleed through the gray mist, thin ribbons of light reaching across the city. Sometimes, not knowing the truth keeps us safe, but sometimes it makes us complicit, and I don't want to be that kind of person. The shift ended in silence, but Ariel's mind was a knot of questions. Who was this man? Why did the hospital bury his name? And why, though he hadn't once opened his eyes, did something about him feel achingly familiar? She didn't know that just days later, when he finally woke, the first eyes he would find in that nameless room would be hers, and from that moment on, neither of their lives would ever be the same. The hospital was unnervingly quiet on that Tuesday night. Outside, snow had begun to fall, later than usual for the year, yet perfectly timed with Ariel's mood. Cold, dense, and blindingly white in its indifference. She stood at the sink, her palms pressed together beneath a stream of hot water. It wasn't enough to chase away the chill that had taken hold of her from the heart up, but it helped her focus. Tonight, all her patients were stable. All but one. Room 3. The man with no name still lay there, unmoving, sealed off behind layers of encrypted data as though his existence itself was classified. Every time Ariel looked at his vitals, she felt like she was tending to a question mark. Someone either too powerful to be known or too dangerous to be named. But it wasn't the mystery that kept her returning to his room. It was something softer, more instinctual. Something that pulled her back, though no one had asked her to stay. The room was dimly lit when she stepped in. The ventilator hissed steadily. The heart monitor ticked along, unchanged. He remained. Adrift, lost somewhere no one could follow, a silent, secret world that mirrored the way he'd arrived. Ariel stood there longer than necessary. Her gaze lingered on his right hand. Long fingers, clean nails, the shape of discipline. Not the hands of someone hardened by life on the streets, not the calloused grip of a street racer. She thought of her father. He used to say, "People in deep comas sometimes still hear you. They just can't find the way back yet." When she was a child, she would sit beside him as he played old soul tunes on his acoustic guitar, songs he called medicine stronger than any doctor's prescription. And for reasons she couldn't explain, tonight, standing in that room, she remembered one of those songs. She placed her stethoscope down, sat at the edge of the bed, fingers resting on the cold steel rail. Then she began to sing. Just a fragment, a quiet chorus, barely above a whisper. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing gonna be all right. A simple Bob Marley lyric, one her father used to sing when Mrs. Monroe coughed through the night. Ariel had been a child then. Now, her mother was the one sick, and she was the one singing instead of listening. She wasn't expecting anything. But something happened. His right arm twitched, not much, not fast, but undeniable. Ariel stopped, watched him. No other movement. But the monitor, there. The brain activity had shifted. She leaned in. Alpha waves just a flutter. Not normal, not random. She placed her hand gently on his forehead. Her voice was soft, almost a lullaby. "You can hear me, can't you?" No answer. She sang again, slower this time, letting each note hang, waiting for something unseen to stir between. The lines. "Rise up this mornin', smiled with the risin' sun." The waves responded. Again. And this time, a sigh slipped from his lips, deep and tired, like something exhaled from a distant part of himself. Ariel shivered. In the break room, she scribbled it down. Not in the hospital system, but in her own journal. Unusual response to auditory stimulus. Song. 2 instances. Possible subconscious awareness? This case isn't as unfeeling as the file implies. Jenna peeked in, raising an eyebrow as she saw her writing. "Still with your mystery man?" Ariel nodded, but didn't elaborate. She wasn't ready to share what she'd felt. Not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want it dismissed as coincidence. She believed what she'd seen, and more than that, she felt it, as though he, whoever he was, had tried to listen. In that silent room, in the world where Ariel often felt completely forgotten. When she returned to his room at the end of her shift, snow had already blanketed the city in ghostly white. He was still there, unmoving, but this time, she left something behind. A small slip of paper on the bedside table. On it, she had written the lyric, "'Cause every little thing, gonna be all right," and she signed it, The Night Nurse. No one ever prepares you for the small moments, the ones quiet enough to miss, but strong enough to shift the entire rhythm of your heart. And Ariel Monroe never imagined that a motionless hand could make her feel as though she were the one being saved, not the one doing the saving. Wednesday morning. Her night shift ended in that hazy space between waking and dreaming. Each step away from the ICU felt twice as heavy as usual, but she didn't head straight for the staff lounge. Instead, she turned left, back toward room 3, the one that had held her thoughts even through sleep-deprived fog. The man with no name still lay there, unmoving, never once opening his eyes, yet somehow responding to her voice the night before. She stepped in, her feet finding their place beside the bed as if guided by muscle memory. Morning light filtered through the window, touching his skin, a sun-worn tan now dulled to gray beneath clinical fluorescence. Ariel exhaled softly, pulled a chair close, and gently draped the thin blanket back across his chest. She didn't know why she did it every morning. Maybe some part of her still believed in small things, that even a tender gesture could pierce through a coma. She sat quietly, then began speaking, her voice light as wind through leaves, telling him how her mother had called at 2 a.m. by mistake, confused again, asking about her father. Nothing important. But in this room, everything felt important, because there was nothing else to hold on to. She used to say, "I asked too many questions," Ariel murmured. "My little sister called me an encyclopedia without a table of contents." She smiled, faintly. "I guess I'm still asking. Like now, I keep wondering who you are, and why no one says your name." The ventilator sighed in rhythm. No response. Ariel leaned her head back against the chair, eyelids slipping closed. Beneath them was the blur of a sleepless night. She drifted off, only for a moment. And in that moment, something happened. The man's hand moved, not a twitch, a search, a purposeful motion, reaching as though groping through darkness for something to hold. Then, he found her. His fingers closed around hers, firm but not painful, protective, desperate, like someone falling into a deep abyss and grabbing onto the only rope left. Ariel jolted awake, eyes wide. She didn't pull away. She didn't breathe too loudly. She just looked at their hands, hers soft and steady, his rough and trembling. Something unspoken passed between them, something human and real. Then, from his cracked, dry lips, a sound, barely a whisper, fractured, raw. "Don't leave me." Ariel froze. The monitors stayed steady. No dramatic spike, no sudden change in brainwaves. But that voice, barely audible, dissolved the world around her. She tightened her grip on his hand. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." A soft gust of air slipped through the cracked window, stirring a film of dust on the sill. The morning sun climbed a little higher, and in that light, his face, still unconscious, seemed to ease, as if some piece of him, deep beneath it all, had heard her. That afternoon, before leaving the hospital, Ariel stopped by the room one last time. She brought a photo, a worn image of her father cradling his guitar at his final community concert. She set it beside yesterday's note and wrote a new line beneath it. "I'm here. If you get lost in your dream, just reach for my hand again." She still didn't know who he was, or whether he could truly hear her. But she knew this. When his hand found hers, the only thing Ariel felt was that maybe, just maybe, she was the one being saved. Some sounds imprint themselves into your mind long before you even realize you exist. Like the first hush of waves when you approach the sea. Like someone calling your name in a fog-heavy dream, or something simpler still. A voice, soft and real, as if it had been placed right at the center of your heart to guide you back to the world. Landon Hayes woke up to a sound like that. Not the beeping machines, not footsteps on linoleum, a woman's voice, low, warm, achingly familiar. You should wake up just once. Maybe you don't need to say anything, but if you can hear me, move your finger, like before. It wasn't a plea, not a command, It was more like a song that someone plays on loop through the night, afraid of losing connection with their own soul. Landon opened his eyes, slowly, heavily. The world around him came in blurs, light, color, time. But the voice was clear. It was the only thing that made sense. He saw a figure in a white coat, her head bent, writing something. Soft curls haloed her face, and before he could find words, she looked up. Those brown eyes, that gaze, gentle and knowing. She smiled, softly, like she'd been waiting for this moment longer than he'd been asleep. "Good morning, stranger," she said. He didn't answer. His throat felt like sandpaper, but he knew she was the one who'd stayed, the one who'd sung, the one who'd held his hand when he didn't know who he was, where he was, or if there was anything left worth coming back for. She poured water into a plastic cup, lifted his head carefully. "Don't speak yet. Just look at me if you understand." Landon blinked. Once, her smile changed, no longer clinical. It was a smile for the living. "Good," she said. "Then I'm guessing you still remember how to breathe." He didn't smile, not really, but his lips twitched. She caught it. "Who are you?" The question hovered at the edge of her tongue, but Ariel didn't ask it. Not because she was afraid of crossing a line, but because some questions are better when offered, not extracted. She stepped back slightly. Her voice was calm. "I'm Ariel. I've been your night nurse for the past 3 days. I don't know who you are. They didn't tell me. But I know you heard me sing. And I believe you knew I was here when you needed someone." He looked at her. Longer than before. A second. Then 2. His eyes lowered, a small, wordless nod. She turned to leave. But then, his voice broke the silence. Hoarse, barely there. "Don't go, Ariel." She froze. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, not turning around. But her heart just missed a beat. She returned after lunch. He was still weak, but his vitals had improved. The doctors were surprised. Recovery had started faster than expected, though no one could say when or if his memory would return fully. "Do you remember anything?" she asked, checking his blood pressure. "A car. An impact. Then a voice. Singing." She smiled. "I'm not sure music has medical value." "It does," he said. "At least it did for me." They were quiet for a while, but it was a gentle kind of silence. "Would you like me to call anyone for you?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. I need to think." She didn't press, and he was grateful. At the door, she paused. "If you need anything, I'm still on night shift." He nodded. "Oh, and if you hear something strange late at night, don't worry. It might just be me." Singing again. Her voice carried a hidden smile behind the mask, and for the first time in days, Landon found himself smiling too. Faint, tired, but real. And sometimes all it takes is one person who doesn't ask, "Who are you?" but simply, "Are you okay?" to make the return to yourself a little less frightening. Tell me, what would it feel like to have the first voice that calls you back from a dream belong to someone who doesn't even know your name? If you believe kindness can save a soul, leave your thoughts below and don't forget to follow for the next chapter, where love begins not with identity, but with the gentlest of touches. Landon woke fully on Thursday morning. The room was the same. Still quiet, still tinged with the scent of antiseptic and the soft, golden light of early day. But today, it no longer felt like a shapeless maze. The world had started to take form. The ventilator tucked into the corner, the trailing vine someone had placed in a glass jar on the windowsill, and the whiteboard with only 2 lines scrawled neatly in soft, curving script. Medication times. 7 a.m., 11 a.m., 6 p.m. If you're feeling low, press the call button. I'm still here. No name was signed, but he knew the handwriting, gentle as the smile he'd seen the day before. Ariel. He didn't remember everything, but he remembered her. Not with his mind exactly, but with something deeper. A feeling that filled the spaces inside him that had been hollow. He remembered her voice in the dark, her hand when nothing else was real, and that silly song that somehow made him feel safe. The door opened. Ariel stepped in, carrying a small clipboard and a blood pressure monitor. She still wore her white coat, her hair pinned in its usual neat bun. But something about her was different. Lighter. Maybe it was because his eyes were open now. "Good morning," she said softly. Landon nodded. "First time I've remembered. A greeting." She smiled. "Then you've remembered more than I expected." At the very least, I remembered the first kind face. She didn't answer, but the slightest blush warmed her cheeks. "How are you feeling?" she asked, checking his vitals. "I'm okay, though I still have no idea who I am in this story." "You're patient 3, she replied. "And the only one this week who hasn't asked for the Wi-Fi password." Landon let out a quiet laugh. "I like the way you talk." "Thank you, though I still don't know your name." He paused for a beat, then smiled. "I'm not sure what my name is to you." Ariel held his gaze a second longer. She knew this man wasn't a drifter or a runaway. His movements were tidy, his words careful. His eyes carried the kind of weight that didn't come from a few days of coma. But she didn't ask. "Do you drink coffee?" she asked instead. He raised an eyebrow. "They allow that in hospitals?" "No, but I do." She pulled a small thermos from her bag and poured into a paper cup. "No cream, no sugar, but better than what comes out of the staff lounge machine." He reached out, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup. Their first touch, awake. Not the grasp of a man trying to stay afloat, but something grounded. Real. "I feel like we've known each other," he said, eyes not leaving her. "You've only known me in your dreams," Ariel replied. "I'm just your night nurse." "But you're the first person I remembered when I woke up." She didn't speak. Not because she had nothing to say, but because, for the first time in years, she felt that words might bruise something too fragile, too precious to define. She pulled a small notepad from her coat pocket, tore a page free, and scribbled something on it. "When you remember your name," she said, placing it on the table, "write it here." Landon took the paper. In her handwriting, he read, "My name is Ariel. I was the one who sang to you, without needing to know who you were." He stared at the note for a moment, then slipped it into the drawer beside the bed, as if it were the first secret they now shared. Neither of them said more. But as Ariel stepped out of the room, Landon turned toward his pillow, hiding a smile that had waited a long time to be remembered. For the first time in years, Landon Hayes woke up without the weight of a schedule, unread emails, or a dozen fires to put out. In this white-walled room, he wasn't a CEO, or the man who kept a healthcare empire afloat, or the too polished figure the press had painted. He was just a patient, bruised, disoriented, nursing a splitting headache and a useless arm, his thoughts still muddied from the fog of unconsciousness. But more than that, he was someone slowly beginning to feel seen, without being judged. The first voice he heard that morning wasn't a doctor's, it was Ariel's. Warm, steady, and unpolished in the most honest way. "You're up," she said, stepping in. "I'm guessing your head still feels like bricks?" He nodded, eyes still blurred from the medication. She walked to his bedside, adjusted the pillow beneath his neck, and glanced at the monitors with practiced calm. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't fawn or flatter or say it was an honor to care for someone important. She did her job, carefully, kindly, professionally, as if he were just one of the many patients she saw every week, and that, more than anything, made him "Pay attention, Ariel," he said softly, testing her name like a new word he somehow already knew. "Yes? Do you know who I am?" She looked at him without a flicker of surprise. "I know you're the man who woke up after 4 days, and the only one today who hasn't asked, 'Where am I?' That's enough to remember you." Landon laughed, a low sound that quickly gave way to a wince as he clutched his head. "You don't need to talk much," Ariel said, gently touching his arm. "Every sentence probably triggers a conference call in your skull." They both smiled, small smiles, real ones. She sat down beside the bed, pulling a small metal tin from her coat pocket. "Do you drink coffee?" He blinked. "Is that allowed here?" "Nope. But then again, no one asked me whether you're a CEO or a criminal either." She poured the dark liquid into a paper cup. The scent of coffee bloomed into the sterile air. "Thanks." He reached for it, their fingers brushing. It was a simple touch, but for him, it felt like something rare. How long had it been since he touched someone without it being a transaction, a photo op, or a risk? He took a sip. The coffee wasn't special, but it made him feel human. "I used to be really good at reading people," he said after a pause. "And now I don't want to read you. I just want someone to look at me and not attach anything else." Ariel nodded slowly. "I used to be a preschool teacher, learned to look at kids without judging them by grades." "Why did you stop?" "Because sometimes, no matter how much you love children, the grown-ups need you more." He watched her, something shifting behind his gaze. No longer just gratitude, but something quieter, deeper, the kind of understanding that didn't need to be spoken. "You're the first person to take care of me without trying to figure out what I'm worth. I've never thought about it," she said. "Never? Or not yet?" "Never," she replied, steady. "I don't need to know who you are to be kind to you." Landon tilted his head, studied her in silence. Something in him softened. Something he'd forgotten was still there. A tenderness he'd once thought too costly to keep. He knew if his name were revealed, everything would change. She might treat him differently. The eyes in this hospital would shift, and the world would drag him back into his role. Power, protocol, and the loneliness of being known only for what you do. But right now, Ariel tucked the blanket around his legs, looked at him without question, and said, "I'll be back, around. 4. Don't fall asleep and miss lunch, okay?" And for a brief, precious moment, Landon felt normal. He realized then, sometimes what we need most isn't someone who knows our name, but someone who chooses to care, even when they don't. Landon woke to a windy afternoon. The room was unchanged. White, still, laced with the clean sting of antiseptic. But something in him had shifted. The haze had begun to lift. His memories remained tangled, but no longer blank. He remembered his name, Landon Hayes, remembered being someone who once controlled everything, and he remembered the eyes of the woman who sat at his bedside the day before, pouring coffee into a paper cup as if it were an ancient ritual of care that asked nothing in return. Ariel. He began to wait for her, not for medication, not for the chart updates, but because she was the only one who spoke to him as if he weren't anyone special at all, just a man trying to remember why he was still here. That afternoon, when Ariel entered the room, she didn't bring coffee or a clipboard, just a small lunchbox and 2 pairs of chopsticks. "I figured eating alone is kind of depressing," she said as she saw him staring out the window. "So, I brought lunch, if you don't mind." Landon smiled. "I only mind if the cook was never a teacher." She laughed under her breath. "Who told you that?" "You did." "Right. I do talk too much." "No, just enough. Right time, right person." She took the chair beside him and opened the lunchbox. They ate quietly at first, side by side. Then Landon asked, softly, as if it had been sitting on his chest all day, "Why did you stop teaching?" Ariel didn't answer right away. She looked at the food, then out the window, then finally at him. And when she spoke, it was like opening a door into herself. "I taught at a little public school. Sweet kids, but we didn't have much. I loved it. Teaching them how to write their names, how to share candy, how to raise their hands when they had something to say. It made me feel useful." What changed? One morning, I was teaching a lesson called The Kindness Story when I got a call from the hospital. My dad, the man I thought would live long enough to meet his grandkids, had a stroke, and my mom had just started losing control of her hands from Parkinson's. Everything collapsed at once. Medical bills, time, money, all of it. She paused. Her voice stayed level, but it frayed slightly at the edges. I left teaching, sold my lesson plans, enrolled in nursing school. I figured, if I couldn't teach kids about kindness anymore, maybe I could practice it with grown-ups in pain. Landon didn't speak. He didn't offer the usual consolations. He just looked at her, as someone who finally understood why every gesture of hers felt so effortlessly kind. "And now," he asked, "now I take care of patients. Most don't remember my name. But I remember them. I remember how the old man in 402 flinches before every injection, how the lady in cardiology asks me to brush her hair. And I remember you too, the first person to hear me sing and not laugh." "Think I heard it with all of me," Landon said. The silence that followed was different, not empty, just full of something neither of them wanted to disturb. Landon looked at Ariel, not with the gaze of a man dazzled by charm or credentials, but with the quiet clarity of someone recognizing worth in how a person lives, not in what the world says they are. "You're still a teacher," he said. Ariel tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "You're still teaching people about kindness, just in a quieter way." She smiled. The saddest, most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. "Thank you. But I'm not teaching anyone. I'm just doing what I wish someone had done for my dad." They sat together in a silence that needed no music, no stage lights, just one person telling the truth and another listening like it mattered. When she stood to clean up, Landon noticed the napkin she'd left behind. There was a faded elementary school logo printed in one corner, faint but visible. He tucked it into his drawer, like a marker, a trace of who she really was. Ariel, who he still didn't know in the outside world, but in here, in the quiet space between injury and recovery, he already knew her better than most. Sometimes it isn't the strange things that make people most curious. It's the ones locked down so deliberately, so precisely. You know the mystery isn't just important, it's protected. The patient file, labeled H57B, confidential, remained a cold wall of silence in Ariel's electronic rounds, a frozen, sealed chamber that even her most trusted access codes couldn't crack. Ariel wasn't someone who chased after what wasn't hers to know, but for the first time in years, something felt wrong. And it wasn't the patient. It was the way someone was working so hard to hide him. She didn't dig because of curiosity. She dug because of duty. Because every shift, every dose, every abnormal reading, without the full picture, one wrong move could cost a life. She tried to access the file the same way she would for any high-risk patient. Access denied. File. Encrypted. High security level. She frowned and tried again. This time, a red warning blinked across the screen. Unauthorized access attempt 2. This action has been recorded. A chill passed through her. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. Someone was watching. Not the patient. The system. Her shift ended early that day with a call from the administrative office. Ariel Monroe, at 09:07 this morning, you attempted to access a secured file, H57B, currently under ICU care, 7th floor. Across the desk sat Ms. Hartley from HR and a senior physician whose name she didn't know but recognized from closed-door meetings. Yes, Ariel answered, steady. I did. I'm the primary nurse on that case. You're aware that encrypted files are off-limits without clearance. I wasn't trying to break rules. I was trying to understand something unusual in his vitals. There's no clear record of his medication sensitivities. I can't safely treat him without knowing. The doctor crossed one leg over the other, voice detached and cold. You must understand, some patients don't belong to the standard system. There are considerations beyond what a floor nurse needs to know. She said nothing, but her pulse rose. Every word reminded her how small her position really was in this place. I never asked who he is, she said quietly. I only want to make sure he doesn't get hurt, or that I don't hurt someone else by not knowing. That's not your concern, Miss Hartley cut in, firmer now. We're not reprimanding you. This is a formal reminder. Know your limits. That afternoon, back in Landon's room, Ariel found him sitting up, sharper than usual, the light in his eyes clearer. Something happen? He asked, watching her try too hard not to look tired. Nothing, she said, too quickly. And she knew. He heard the lie. He didn't press, but his eyes followed her longer than they used to. He was starting to sense it too. That night at home, Ariel didn't try again to break into the system. She opened her laptop and typed, each keystroke like pouring cold water on a burn. Day 227. Today, I was reprimanded for trying to do the right thing. My only mistake was asking a question. The desk lamp cast her shadow against the wall, long, thin, and quiet, just like her place in this vast machine called hospital policy. She thought of her father, the man who taught her never to ignore the voice of her conscience. She thought of the time her mother had trouble breathing and a nurse called her by the wrong name. She had sworn then, "No one in my care will be forgotten like that. No one will be mislabeled." And now she was caring for someone who didn't even have a name and wasn't allowed to be asked about. She pulled out her worn leather notebook and wrote on a clean page, "I don't want to know who he is for the headlines. I want to know because his life is in my hands every night." The next morning, a man in a black suit appeared in the ICU corridor. His badge read, "External Affairs," but there was no name. He stepped into the nurse's office, polite but frost-edged. "I'm here to confirm the care schedule for patient H57B. "And you are?" Ariel asked. "Public Relations Officer for Hayes Medical Group." That was all she needed to hear. When the ICU quieted that evening, Ariel stayed behind, alone in the break room. She curled onto the long bench, holding a photo, herself at 23, in a graduation gown beside her father. Her face then still full of morning sky hope. Now, "Dad, if I'd stayed a teacher, maybe I wouldn't get scolded today for asking the right question." Her voice cracked, not in song, but from exhaustion. "I'm not curious about who he is. I'm afraid because no one is allowed to ask. And that's what scares me." She opened the drawer and pulled out the notebook where she'd recorded every nameless patient, every time she held a hand as someone slipped away, every moment a life ended without anyone to remember it. Is it wrong to ask if he has drug allergies? Is it wrong to want to know the name of the man I'm supposed to call by a number? I'm a nurse, but I'm not a machine. The next morning, she returned to Landon's room. He was still asleep, face softened in the gentle morning light. She left, a small note on the table beside his bed. Just one line. "If one day you want to tell me, I'll listen. Not as your nurse, but as a human being." She wasn't supposed to do it. She knew the rules. But after the reprimand the day before, Ariel understood something more clearly than ever. Some rules exist only to make sure no one asks questions, and sometimes, if you don't choose to trust your instinct, you risk losing the one thing that still makes you human. So, when Landon asked to leave the room for a while, she didn't report it. She just said, "If anyone asks, I'll say you got lost." That afternoon, a fine rain fell, less a storm, more a haze, the kind of drizzle that fogs the windows just enough to make you feel unsettled in ways you can't quite name. In room 3, Landon sat by the window, slowly turning a cup of water in his hands. Under the muted light, his hair was no longer damp, with fever, and his gaze had steadied, no longer wandering, no longer lost. When Ariel entered, he looked at her the way one breathes. Familiar, vital. "What would you say?" he asked, voice soft but sure. "If I said I need to go for a walk?" Ariel raised an eyebrow, part surprise, part challenge. "You've only been off IV for 2 days. A walk? What kind of patient do you think you are? The kind whose doctor quietly signed off on lightly supervised movement." She blinked. "You manipulated your doctor?" I persuaded. "There's a difference." She sighed, shaking her head, but a smile tugged at her lips. "Should I be afraid or impressed?" "You should come with me." 10 minutes later, she wheeled him down the corridor. Landon sat comfortably, hands resting on the armrests, eyes moving like he was seeing everything for the first time outside confinement. No one noticed. Her timing was precise. 5:45 p.m., just before shift change. The elevator doors opened. Neither of them spoke. When they reached the rooftop garden, rarely used, a retreat space for staff, Ariel paused. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to come up here whenever I needed to cry, but you can't cry in the ICU. And now I come up here whenever someone makes me feel heard." She wheeled him to a wooden bench near the railing. The breeze carried hints of mint from the little potted plants lining the wall. In the distance, the Chicago skyline blinked awake, one light at a time. "I always thought," she said, taking a seat beside him, "if I ever went on a real date, it'd be in a place like this. Not a restaurant, not a hotel, just somewhere quiet enough to hear each other breathe. And I," Landon said, "once thought I'd never date again." Ariel didn't answer. The wind tousled her hair, a strand brushing against her cheek. Landon lifted a hand to tuck it behind her ear, but stopped halfway. "Sorry," he said, withdrawing. "It's okay," she replied. "You're just remembering how to be human. Seems like you're always right. Only when it comes to people I care about." Their eyes met. No more words, but everything necessary had already arrived. In the silence, in the breath between them, in the heartbeat, just loud enough for two people to hear. By the time they returned to the room, night had settled. Ariel adjusted his pillow, her hand pausing over the call button. "Your first secret walk," she said, teasing. "Let's not file a report with your company." "There's nothing to report," he replied. "Just an evening with a woman who doesn't know who I am." She smiled. "Exactly. That's what makes it real." She stepped out. Landon stayed behind, eyes fixed on the ceiling. No longer just a patient, but a man relearning how to feel. One breath, one emotion at a time. Have you ever had a conversation without names, without reasons, just to feel like a person again? Maybe healing begins in the moments where neither of you needs to be called by anything at all. Monday morning. The air at St. Augustine felt heavier than usual, like something unspoken had thickened it. People spoke in lower tones, their footsteps faster, their glances sharper, familiar signs in the medical world. Something was about to break. Ariel stepped into the ICU, barely unzipped her bag before the whispers began to close in around her. She was his primary nurse. "Is it really him? I saw the photo. It's still on the internal server. Word is he owns most of the hospital's shares." She turned sharply, her eyes locked with Mila's, young, guilty, tense. "Mila, who are you talking about?" The Nyare girl fumbled. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything. I just saw the photo people were passing around. From yesterday. It's the patient in room 3, Landon Hayes." The name was no longer foreign to Ariel, but hearing it spoken aloud, in a public hallway from someone else's mouth, felt like someone had ripped the delicate fabric she'd been trying so carefully to drape over the truth. "What photo?" she asked. Mila hesitated, then handed her the phone, a single frame, shot from a distance, on the rooftop. Landon in his wheelchair, eyes on the skyline, smiling faintly. Beside him, Ariel, leaning in, wind in her hair, hand resting lightly on the chair's arm, just a moment, but enough to ignite a storm. Within 30 minutes, a closed-door meeting was called. Ariel wasn't invited, but she didn't need to be. The silence on the other side of the glass walls was thunderous. Dark suits, golden name tags, phones glued to ears, the head of communications, legal representatives, 2 from Hayes Corporation. A crimson warning flashed on the internal bulletin, "Unauthorized image leak. Patient H57B. Investigation ongoing. Temporary system access suspended for several users." Ariel didn't need anyone to say it. She was already inside the spiral. She walked slowly back toward the patient wing. The ICU, always still, now felt constricted. Conversations stopped when she passed. Some greeted her stiffly, others turned away. A few didn't bother to hide the mix of suspicion and envy in their eyes. Landon sat upright, propped against a pillow, eyes on the morning news flashing across the screen. His face was unreadable, the kind of stillness reserved for people who'd navigated more than one crisis before. She stepped in, closed the door, stood still. "You've seen it?" Nodded. "Since early this morning. You're not going to say anything?" "I can't. And honestly, I don't want to." She stared at him. A tangle of reactions tightened inside her. Surprise, frustration, disappointment, and a strange, cold fear. That between them, something had already begun to fracture. "Why? Didn't you tell me who you were?" she whispered. Landon looked at her directly. "Because if you'd known, you wouldn't have sung." The words were soft, but they split the air cleanly, like a quiet blade. Ariel felt something inside her unravel. Thread by thread, the memory of nights unspoken, fragile and real. "Do you think I feel lied to?" "I think you feel pulled into a game you didn't choose. And you stood back," she said, voice tight, "while I was reprimanded, questioned, looked at like I was exploiting someone, because of you." Landon lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry." Ariel turned away. She didn't cry, but inside the pocket of her coat, her fingers clenched around the worn piece of paper he once wrote. "I didn't hide from you. I just wanted to stay a little longer in the truth." But the truth was here now, and it wasn't gentle. That afternoon, she was called to administration. Not for punishment, they said, but for clarification. They asked about her relationship with the patient, if she knew his real identity before today. Their voices were calm, but the questions dripped with something sharper than accusation, something surgical. Ariel didn't give them much. "I'm here to care for patients," she said, "not to scroll through headlines." When she returned to the ICU, some colleagues avoided her gaze. Others smiled too tightly. Mila didn't look at her at all. The hospital had changed. So had she. That night back home, she sat at her empty kitchen table, turned on the soft yellow light, and unfolded the note again. "I didn't hide from you. I just wanted to stay a little longer in the truth." She realized then, maybe Landon meant it. But the truth, when revealed the wrong way, always has a way of tearing through the softest things. And she, just a nurse trying to do right, was now caught in a world where right and wrong weren't measured by conscience anymore, but by power. That morning, Ariel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages lit up the screen. Contacts she hadn't heard from in years, old college friends, nurse group chats, even distant acquaintances. One after another, each notification pulled her deeper into the storm that had finally reached her doorstep. Breaking. CEO Landon Hayes, majority shareholder of St. Augustine Medical Center, undergoing secret treatment at his own hospital. The attached photo said everything. Landon, clad in ivory patient scrubs, seated in a wheelchair with a blanket draped neatly over his legs. His face turned slightly away from the camera, but unmistakable. That faraway gaze, as if he were thinking of something he couldn't say. Aloud, and beside him, her, hair tousled by wind, hand resting gently on the armrest of his chair. A moment once private, now bannered across news feeds nationwide as the centerpiece of a national healthcare scandal. When Ariel stepped through the hospital's entrance, it felt like the entire building had turned itself inside out to stare at her. No one said anything, but every glance carried weight, stares that pressed into her skin, warping every movement into something suspicious. In the nurses' lounge, every screen played a variation of the same headline. Panels debated the ethics of a CEO seeking treatment in a facility he owned. One anchor asked a guest expert whether such blurred boundaries endangered institutional trust. She didn't listen. She just stood still, frozen inside a reality that no longer belonged to her. When she entered Landon's room, he was already awake. The TV was on mute. His eyes met hers, the calmness he once carried now shadowed with something raw. "I'm sorry," he said. Ariel said nothing, not because she was angry, but because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't shatter what remained. "I thought I could control this," he continued. "I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to be revealed," she said, her voice even. "You were wrong to believe you could keep me out of it." Landon's hands tightened into fists. His thumb trembled slightly. He wanted to step out of the role he'd been playing, but there was no exit that didn't involve collateral damage. "I chose the wrong person to shield." "No," she said finally. "You chose the right person. You just didn't give her a chance to stand with you." That afternoon, Ariel was summoned to the executive floor. There were no soft words now, no veiled warnings, just a clear line drawn in the air between her and the hospital she'd served faithfully for years. "We are considering a temporary suspension," they said. "For what?" she asked. "Violation of confidentiality, potential conflict of interest, and reputational damage to the hospital." She let out a dry, humorless laugh, a sound no one had heard from her before. "And the man treated under encrypted protocol without a legal admission file. Does he pose no risk to your reputation?" No one answered. She stood, eyes steady as a seam pulled tight across an open wound. Late that day, she returned to Landon's room once more. She wasn't in uniform. No ID badge, no clipboard. Just herself. Ariel, as he had first met her. "I'm about to be suspended." He looked up. "I'll fix this." "Don't." Her voice held no anger now, nor softness, just the clarity that comes from passing through the center of heartbreak and stepping out the other side. "I only want one thing before I leave." He waited. "When I sang to you," she said, "I thought I was helping a man who had nothing but silence, but it turns out I was singing to a man who knew exactly who he was and chose silence." "And you're disappointed?" "No, I'm just sorry." She turned and walked out, hands deep in her coat pockets, not clutching a note this time, but holding the pieces of her heart as they quietly came undone. Wednesday morning. Sunlight filtered into the ICU hallway, but it didn't bring warmth the way it used to. It struck the floors at an angle, dappled and uneasy, casting long shadows of people trying not to move too loudly, as if even breathing too boldly might attract attention. Ariel stepped in, carrying a small canvas bag with her personal things. She wasn't there to pack up. Not yet. Just to pass through, like she had for 10 years. But this time her footsteps echoed differently, as though the tiles had iced over and each step sent ripples across frozen water. She heard the whispers before she even reached the nurse's station. That's her Ariel, the nurse with the special relationship with Hayes. Yeah, she was going into his room every night. Makes sense now. Probably got some hush money out of it too. Picked the right man to follow. She didn't look at them, didn't speak, didn't correct. She walked straight past, but every word burrowed deep, small, cold needles threading through her pride. In the break room, she opened her locker, began to gather what was hers. The shoes. She wore on overnight shifts a half-used ink cartridge, the hand-embroidered handkerchief from her mother. Tucked into the corner was a photo. Her and two colleagues, laughing during a Christmas shift last year. One of them had looked away earlier that morning when she entered, like a stranger. Worse than a stranger. She slipped the photo into her bag. Her fingers brushed against a note she'd once scribbled, to herself, months ago. Always remember, you might be the last person a patient sees each day. And now, she wondered, who would want to see her? Just as she was about to leave, Mila entered, the younger nurse who used to call her Ari the Gentle. Ariel almost smiled, but Mila walked past without looking. Her eyes darted to the floor, her shoulders tight with avoidance. The small tilt of her head said everything. I'm not brave enough to stand with you. Ariel nodded once, quietly, the way you nod when accepting a verdict. She didn't call a car on the way home. She walked. Blocks and blocks, the wind threading through her hair like cold fingers. It wasn't enough to numb the bitterness sitting in the back of her throat. She stopped at a familiar cafe near the hospital, the place where she and Jenna once vented about difficult patients, where she'd texted a first date once, long ago. She ordered a black coffee, sat in the farthest corner, hands around the paper cup, eyes unfocused. Behind her, a voice cut through the air, loud enough to reach her, not loud enough to seem deliberate. You can't trust her anymore. All that press and she still acts like she's innocent? A group of nurses, not realizing she was there. Or maybe they did. Ariel didn't turn around. She just gripped her coffee tighter, closed her eyes. No reaction, no rebuttal, because a reaction would become evidence. That night, she came home and didn't. Turn the lights on. She removed her shoes, sat on the floor. Back against the sofa. Looking out into the dark window pane, the city still lit behind it. But she felt pushed out of the light, tucked into the shadows of a world that no longer wanted her voice to matter. She didn't cry. She just sat there. At 9:15 p.m., Landon's message arrived. I'll say everything, I'll name you, protect you, said it right. She read it, placed her phone on the table, poured herself a glass of water. Every motion felt like it belonged to someone else, as though she were watching herself move inside a slow, silent dream. She remembered the first time she saw him, unconscious, stitched across the forehead. She'd cleaned his face with warm cloths, humming a Bob Marley tune, simply because the silence had felt too cruel. Back then, he was just a patient. Now, in the eyes of the world, she was the woman who must have known, and who had invested feelings accordingly. Kindness, once the quiet creed she lived by, was being recast as performance. Trust, once shared only between the two of them, was now an open wound dissected by strangers. She stood in front of the mirror, a woman, brown-skinned, 33, A nurse, no makeup, no wealth, no power network. But once, she believed that was enough, that quiet, consistent decency would hold. Now she asked herself, what did I do wrong? But the better question was, why are people so quick to believe in malice and so reluctant to believe in grace? Late that night, she opened her old notebook, wrote a single line beneath that day's date. I don't see myself as a victim, but I do see myself twisted by a world that no longer believes anyone is good simply because they choose to be. They need a motive, a reward, a scheme, and if they don't find one, they'll invent it. She closed the book, rested her head on the couch cushion. That night, she didn't cry, but she didn't sleep either. Only one thing remained unchanged. She had never wanted him to be a CEO. She had only wanted him to live. Ariel didn't go to the hospital that day. She didn't answer her phone, didn't reply to messages, didn't acknowledge the emails from HR. She vanished like a ripple sinking back into still water. Landon called all morning, voicemails piling up, texts sent in fragments like someone trying to speak while drowning. I'm sorry, Ariel. Please, I need to talk. But silence was the only response he got. Across the city, Ariel sat by the window of a quiet cafe, fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of lemon water gone warm. She had read everything. The articles, the clipped headlines, the edited videos, the sneering captions, nurse or strategist. From ICU to CEO's heart, romance or agenda. But what wounded her most wasn't the press. It was Landon, who said nothing when it counted. No warning. No shield. She remembered standing at his bedside, laying her hand gently on his forehead, humming a line of a song she couldn't now recall. Back then, she didn't know his name, his wealth, his world, and because of that, it had felt real. But now, everything had been dragged into the light, packaged, dissected, renamed. What they shared, fragile, undefined, was now someone's spectacle, a narrative, a scandal, a love story rewritten by people who'd never heard her voice. That night, Landon showed up at her doorstep. No warning, no entourage, no suit, just a man in a dark sweater, shadows under his eyes, standing beneath her porch light like a schoolboy, showing up for an apology he didn't know how to make. Ariel opened the door, froze, then, coldly, "What are you doing here?" "To talk," he said. "Is there anything left to say?" "Ariel, don't say my name." Her voice didn't rise, but it shook slightly. Not from fear, from anger colliding with heartbreak. "I didn't mean to hide things from you forever," he said. "I just thought, if I could keep things how they were, a little longer." "You mean back when I didn't know who you were?" he said. "Nothing." "You know what hurt the most?" she continued, eyes wet but steady. "It wasn't the media. It was realizing that I thought I knew you. But all I ever saw was the version you chose to let me see. Ariel, you thought I needed you to protect me? Thought I wanted you to stand in front of cameras and defend me?" She shook her head, voice quiet and sharp. "I don't need anyone to explain something I didn't do wrong. It's not because you're wrong," he said. "It's because the world is." "Then you should have said that. Before the world came for me." Silence settled between them like a dense, cold fog. Landon didn't move closer. Ariel didn't shut the door. They stood, two people who once shared a rooftop and a quiet, wordless rhythm, now facing each other across A wall built of truth withheld and words unsaid. At last, Ariel spoke. "I don't hate you, but I don't trust you anymore." Landon nodded. A slow, heavy gesture, like accepting a sentence he knew he deserved. "You should go," she said softly. "And I need time to forget you. Not because you're the CEO, but because now I don't know who I cared for anymore." The door closed, not with anger, but with finality. Landon stood for a moment, then turned, descended the steps slowly, each one carrying the weight of something not yet named, but already lost. Some betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the person who once brought you coffee during a night shift, from the one who squeezed your shoulder after a grueling code blue, from the one who used to call you, "I see you, soul sister." Ariel never imagined that person would be Jenna. The hospital's internal investigation moved quickly after the media explosion. The ethics board got involved. Tracing the IP address of the first leaked photo, the security system uncovered the origin. A staff login from the night shift, belonging to Jenna A., the senior nurse Ariel had trusted most. Anonymous messages, leaked emails, a post to the internal staff network, all linked back to one terminal, the corner workstation where Jenna always offered to cover a little longer. Landon was the first to tell her. His voice over the phone was soft, cautious. "I think you deserve to know where it started." When Ariel read the report, her hands went cold. Not from shock, but because somewhere deep inside, she'd suspected. She just hadn't let herself believe it. Jenna had once said, "Patients always seem to love you. Maybe it's that soft voice of yours. If you were my boss, I'd be too scared to make a mistake." Small things. Things Ariel had brushed aside. Now each one returned like pins pressing against skin. She didn't confront Jenna. There was no need to turn the truth into another bitter scene. But the hospital did call her in. Jenna's statement, recorded in the internal report, was harder to read than any headline. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just thought maybe people would finally see her like a regular person. I've spent a lifetime doing things right and being invisible, and she cared for one patient and became the center of everything." A confession veiled in the language of wounded pride. The press didn't get this part. Landon made sure of that, at Ariel's request. "I don't want anyone destroyed because of one moment of envy," she said. "I just want someone to know I was kind. And I was betrayed, not because I did something wrong, but because I didn't." Inside the hospital, though, word spread like fire. And suddenly, empathy returned. The stares softened. The whispers shifted. The same mouths that had once doubted her now murmured, "Ari got set up. Jenna, I never would have guessed. We're lucky to have someone like Ariel." But Ariel didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel cleared. Only empty. Landon proposed a press conference. Not to explain, but to redefine the truth. That day, the hospital's media room was packed. Cameras, microphones, hospital executives, all waiting for a story, a headline. But Landon Hayes, the man in the center seat, began by talking about someone else. "The week I was admitted, a woman cared for me around the clock, not knowing who I was. She sang to me while I was unconscious, pressed warm cloths to my face, held my hand when no one else was there." He looked directly at the cameras. "Her name is Ariel Monroe. She's a nurse. and she didn't need me to be a CEO to treat me with kindness. The moment was seismic. Online, the narrative flipped. Articles changed tone. Hashtags appeared. Stand with Ariel. His quote went viral, made into minimalist posters, soft palette illustrations, heartfelt memes. She didn't need me to be a CEO to be kind. Ariel stayed silent. No interviews, no public posts. But that night, she opened her window for the first time in days, let the air rush in, as if, finally, she could breathe without flinching. The story of Jenna never made it to the public. Landon kept it buried. For Ariel, she had only one request. I don't need revenge. I just need it known that I didn't do this for gain. I did it because it was right. What do you think about Jenna's actions? Was it betrayal? Or a quiet cry from someone who had felt invisible too long? Leave your thoughts in the comments because right and wrong aren't always clear. But feelings? They always come from somewhere. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever been misunderstood for choosing kindness. And don't forget to like and follow for the next chapter, where truth and tenderness are tested to their limits. It began as nothing more than a simple blog post. No clickbait headline, no images, no mention of the name Landon Hayes, no tags, no hashtags, just a quiet entry on an anonymous blog with a free domain, no ads, no glossy interface. I once cared for someone whose name I didn't know, and he didn't know mine. I thought I was doing my job. But it turns out I was believing. Ariel had written it on a rainy afternoon, after realizing there was no other way to speak her truth than simply writing it down, not to explain, not to defend, just to recount what happened, as it truly happened, from where she stood, as a nurse, as a woman, as a human being. I didn't love him because of who he was. I loved the way he looked at me without seeing a title, and somehow, in the end, no one asked how I felt. The post was barely 700 words long, but there was something in the voice, quiet, steady, unsentimental, that made readers pause, a beautiful sorrow, not bitter, but deep. And then it spread. Shared quietly in a group chat for night shift nurses, forwarded by a resident on their Instagram story, picked up by a columnist who writes letters without return addresses. Then larger accounts reposted it, women in healthcare forums, anonymous writing collectives. Even a few influencers dedicated to kindness in professionalism. In less than 48 hours, the blog post climbed to the top of trending social content. And, for the first time, the public wasn't asking who was right or who's to blame. They were asking who gets to be heard when no one thinks to ask them how they feel. At St. Augustine, whispers returned, but this time they carried something softer. That blog, was that her? She didn't use names, but we all know that writing. Only Ariel sounds like that. Some senior physicians read it too. They said nothing, but the next day, one of them stopped Ariel in the hallway and simply said, "Thank you for saying what the rest of us never dared to." Landon was the last to know, not because he wasn't watching, but because Ariel didn't send it, didn't suggest, didn't hint. She hadn't written it for him to see. She'd written it so she could look herself in the mirror and know that in a world bent on distortion, she had stayed rooted in truth. When Landon reached the end of the post, where she wrote, "I don't need someone to save me. I just need someone to believe that I wasn't wrong for choosing to care before I knew someone's name." He froze. Not because she wrote care, but because she wrote before I knew someone's name. It was how she made it clear, to him, to the world, and to herself, that her love had never been for the power, it had been for the person beneath it, and that person hadn't protected her in time. Meanwhile, the hospital board called an emergency meeting. The post didn't mention names, didn't accuse, didn't label. But truth, told in the right voice, becomes impossible to ignore. The administration split. One half wanted to suppress the post, investigate the author. The other half remained silent, because to act would be to admit it was all real. In the end, they did nothing, which in its own way was a surrender. Ariel received one email from the hospital. "We confirm that your suspension will be lifted. We hope you will consider returning to work. Your presence is valued. No apology, no explanation, but enough to know her unnamed, untagged, unadorned truth had accomplished what no hearing or press release ever could. It had made them listen. Ariel didn't return to the hospital immediately, but she kept writing. Not daily, not lengthy, just small reflections. On the frail patient who gripped her hand while unconscious, on how kindness only seems to matter once it's under scrutiny. On how, in this world, women of color must tell their stories louder and more often just to be believed. Even in the quietest truths. She still didn't sign her blog, but this time, everyone knew who it was, and no one dared twist her words again. Landon hadn't slept the night before. He was no longer the man who once oversaw a hospital system with over 2,000 employees. Not the man who spoke fluently to global investors. Not the media-trained executive who never needed a script. Tonight, he was simply a man afraid. Not for his name, but for hers. Ariel Monroe. Dragged into the spotlight. Dissected, judged, while he had yet to stand up and say the one thing that needed to be said. The boardroom was on the 14th floor, highest, farthest, and coldest. A U-shaped walnut table surrounded the projection screen, the lights above bright enough to burn. 12 people sat in silence. Executives, strategic advisors, longtime shareholders. None of them knew why Landon had called this emergency meeting. Only that he, the founder, was back, for the first time since the media leak. When he entered, no one greeted him, but every eye followed. He wore a plain white shirt, no tie. In his hand, a single folded piece of paper. He placed it carefully on the table in front of him. He didn't sit. He just stood and began. Her name is Ariel Monroe. No one moved. The chairwoman on the right tilted her head, waiting for context. You all know I was hospitalized. Coma, recovery. What the charts don't show is that I was cared for by someone who didn't know my name. He looked up, swept the room with his eyes. She didn't try to access the encrypted file. She didn't ask the wrong questions. She just sang, poured water, stayed longer than she had to. Someone raised a hand. Lerman, the CFO. Mr. Hayes, this is an executive meeting. If you're intending to share personal... Mr. Lerman, Landon said gently but firmly, I called this meeting to say what the balance sheet has no space for. Today is not about dividends. Today is about honor. The room fell still. Lerman lowered his hand. Said nothing. I was accused of hiding a relationship. She was accused of manipulation. You've read the headlines. Some in this room even recommended her suspension for damaging the hospital's image. You were within your rights. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the paper. Creased, a little worn. Held it up for all to see. This is the note she left me. Before she knew who I was. Before anyone decided to post my face on the internet. He unfolded it. Read, slowly. If one day you want to tell your story, I'll listen, not as your nurse, but as a person. He placed the paper on the table. Let silence hold the moment. And today, I'm telling it, not as a CEO, not as a shareholder, but as a man who was brought back to life by someone who didn't need to know my name to care. A pen dropped, a chair creaked, but no one spoke. Landon continued. You ask if I had a relationship. With her? Yes, but not the kind you imagine. She didn't seduce me. She saved me. From a life where I was admired by everyone but felt seen by no one. She didn't care that I was the CEO, and that is what kept me alive. Silence. Heavy. The screen behind him continued to loop the hospital logo, soft and slow. Then a voice from across the room. Female. Deliberate. She hasn't come back to work, said Mrs. Hartley, the same director who once reprimanded Ariel. She? Refused compensation. She hasn't spoken to the press. I read the blog, she added. No names, no blame, but it reminded me why I joined this profession in the first place. Landon nodded. He knew. Someone had started to understand. The meeting ended after 73 minutes. No vote. No resolution. Only silence, and in that silence, agreement. Truth, told the right way, moves without permission. Somewhere else in the city, Ariel received a message from a former colleague. Board meeting this morning. He read the note you left. The whole room, silent. Ariel read it, set her phone down, and for the first time in days, she smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but one deep and tired and rooted, like a tree after the storm. The Hayes estate, tucked in the northern suburbs of Chicago, sat silent among a forest of maple trees turning red with fall. On this biting, cold Saturday afternoon, the air inside the marble-walled sitting room was even colder. Landon stood by the fireplace, watching the flame flicker low. He held a cup of black tea he hadn't touched. Across from him, poised on a leather armchair, sat the only woman alive who could keep him silent this long. Margaret Hayes, his mother. Elegant, silver-haired, spine straight as steel, she held the morning's magazine in one hand. On the cover, Landon's face. Below, it. Billionaire Hayes speaks out for a nurse. A love story off script? She folded the paper with a precise snap and looked at him. You know why I'm here. Because you read the headline, Landon replied, voice even. No. Because you canceled a meeting with the Asia Pacific Commercial Board to make a speech defending a nurse. The word nurse landed like a stain. You could call her by her name, Landon said, eyes still on his cup. That girl, Margaret stressed, is not worthy of what you're putting at risk. Landon set the cup down. The room seemed to still with him. What's your definition of worthy, Mom? Someone from a compatible family. Someone raised for our world. Someone who doesn't turn your name into the subject of a tabloid romance. You. Think I'm acting out some kind of Romeo fantasy? No, Margaret snapped, her tone sharpening. I think you're being reckless. You are Landon Hayes, the heir to everything this family built. The man who once told me he didn't believe in soft feelings. Landon finally looked at her. Exactly. I didn't. And then someone came along who looked at me and saw not my last name, not my future, just me, and I couldn't walk away from that. Margaret stood, paced. Her heels clicked on the polished floor. What has she done for you, besides take care of you when you didn't even know your own name? She's the only person who didn't need me to have one. And that's enough for you to gamble your entire life? No, he said. It's enough for me to stop pretending. Across the city, in a quiet corner of a second-hand bookshop, Ariel sat alone. A newspaper lay open beside her. Hayes' matriarch speaks, I don't believe a nurse is the best for my son. She closed the book in her lap. Didn't cry, but her chest tightened. Not from rejection, but from the ache of being defined. Despite the blog, the silence, the speech, the press conference, to people like Margaret Hayes, she would always be just. A nurse, the girl who got lucky. That evening, Landon knocked on her door. Ariel opened it, unsurprised, as if she'd known he would come. You should be with your mother, she said, steady. She needs an answer, Landon replied, and my answer is you. She tilted her head, something in her eyes unreadable. You know, she began, slowly, people don't need to yell to cause harm. Sometimes it only takes a glance, a sentence, or a word, like unworthy. Landon stepped inside. The apartment was warm, modest, so unlike the stone walls of his family home. I'm not running, Landon, she continued, but I'm also not willing to live each day under a microscope, watched by your mother, by the press, by anyone who thinks I got you by chance. Then give me the chance, he said, to show them all that I chose you, not because you're different, but because you're you. She said nothing. Her hand rested on the doorknob. I can't keep fighting your battles for you, she said, almost a whisper. This time, Landon said, I'll fight. That night he sent out an official press invitation. Not to discuss finances. Not to speak about the hospital. Just a single, unwavering headline on personal choice and justice within judgment. Friday evening. The sun was slipping westward, brushing the hospital corridor walls in warm honey gold, the kind of light that made silence feel like softness. Ariel stepped onto the rooftop garden, once her and Landon's quiet haven. The April breeze moved gently, carrying with it the faint, comforting scent of rosemary and mint from the potted herbs along the railings. Everything on that rooftop seemed to hum with memory. Shared coffee, unspoken glances, the ache of two people, not quite ready to name what was growing between them. But today, Ariel came alone. Landon had sent the invitation, a private dinner. No press, no board, just him, and a small velvet box resting on the table where they used to sit. She knew what was inside, and she knew what she would say. That night, she arrived right on time, wearing a linen dress the color of amber dusk. No makeup, no performance, just herself, as she had been the first time she walked into his hospital room, present, uncertain, honest. Landon rose when he saw her. He smiled, not with expectation, but with quiet hope. His eyes held waiting, but no pressure. Thank you for coming, he said. She sat down, took a breath, didn't look at the box. I need to say something before you open that. He stilled, sat straighter, ready. You know, I care for you, she began. I believe you did all this, not for image, not to defy your mother, but because of me. I did, he said, but... She looked down, her voice softening. I've been through too much, too fast. I went from being a nurse no one noticed, to a headline, a symbol, a cautionary tale, a redemption arc. I've been defended, doubted, and defined. By strangers, by systems, by people who never knew me. She looked up. Her eyes weren't afraid, only tired, only real. I can't step into something if I don't know who I am inside it. I need to find where I stand, what I want, and what kind of life I want to live, before I try to love someone again. Landon sat still. He didn't say, why? He didn't say, you don't have to worry. He didn't plead. He just said, I understand. I lost myself for years. And when you came in, I remembered what it was like to exist again. So if you need time to find your way back to you, I won't stop you. I'll wait, or I won't, but I'll never try to hold you still. Ariel smiled, and in that smile was the deepest kind of gratitude. Thank you. For not being angry. How could I be angry, he said gently, at someone brave enough to say, I need to know who I am before I say who I love. They sat in silence a while longer. Two people who once touched something delicate. Now choosing quiet, so they didn't break it. The ring stayed in its box. Unopened, and somehow that said more than any yes ever could. Because sometimes the truest kind of love isn't in the claiming, but in the stepping back. So both people can still recognize themselves. That night, Ariel went home, opened her old notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote, I didn't reject love, I just refused to lose myself to keep it. If he truly loves me, he will understand. She closed the journal, looked out her window at the city pulsing with quiet light. And for the first time in months, Ariel felt no regret. She had chosen right, not the easiest thing, but the one that let her stay. Herself. The hospital conference room didn't look like itself that day. No thick financial reports, no patient charts, no shareholders or suits, just a single microphone, a white screen, and a logo in soft gray. Frontline Soul Fund. Two hands holding, open, and steady, and Landon Hayes standing in the center. No blazer, no lapel pin. Just his voice, quiet but anchored. In the past month, he began, I've witnessed more than a personal crisis. I saw a system where the people who carry the most weight are given the least protection. He turned slightly, met Ariel's eyes, seated in the front row. They didn't look like lovers, they looked like co-conspirators in something better. And so today, he said, I introduce the Frontline Soul Fund, a foundation for the emotional, material, and professional renewal of frontline workers. Applause followed, not loud, but full, the kind that moves like a ripple beneath the surface, steady and sure. Ariel hadn't known when he'd started this, only that this morning, while sipping her coffee, he had emailed her. You once told me you didn't want love if it meant losing yourself. So today, I won't offer a ring. I'm offering what you always dreamed of building, A place for people like you used to be. Attached was a detailed plan. Budgets, strategies, nonprofit models, and one last line. I didn't choose a director for PR. I chose someone who knows the pain, so they'd know where to begin healing. At the launch, Ariel stood next to Landon, not as the CEO's partner, not as the woman defended by headlines, but as the fund's first executive director. Her speech was brief, but her eyes lit with something stronger than any spotlight. We often speak of angels in scrubs, she said, but angels break too, and any system worth preserving must not let its pillars disappear into the shadows. This fund isn't mine. It's not Landon's. It belongs to every hand that's held someone else's pulse without ever being asked, "Are you okay?" 1 year later, the fund had supported 67 frontline workers, from trauma response therapy to scholarship programs for second careers, from emergency child care grants to a national mentorship network for those on the brink of burnout. Ariel no longer worked in the ICU, but when she passed the hospital gates, she often paused in front of a small nameplate on the 3rd floor. Thai Air, 3. Frontline Soul Fund office beneath it, a bronze plaque, founded by someone who didn't need to know a title to do the right thing. Landon stayed in the background. No press appearances, no promo videos. He let Ariel lead, just as she'd once led him, out of silence, out of survival, into purpose. That winter, during the fund's year-end gathering, Ariel stood before a group of young counselors and nurses and said, "There are things you can't carry into love if you don't know who you are, but when you do, you can love someone without losing yourself." She looked out toward the city, still rushing, still noisy, but here, in this room, she knew she was living what her quiet heart had once only hoped for. Have you ever worked in healthcare, education, or any frontline profession? Did you ever feel invisible? Did someone ever show up when you needed them most? Share your story with us, because maybe your truth is exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if you believe that kindness deserves structure, not just sentiment, share this story with someone you think is still carrying the world without a name. The filming took place in a space that didn't look like a studio, because it wasn't one. It was a converted woodshop on the quiet edge of the city, with raw brick walls and the scent of sawdust still faint in the floor. The ceiling was high, the lighting low, the air still. No production crew chatter, no stage makeup, no teleprompter. Just one chair, one camera, and Ariel Monroe, walking in with a stack of blank paper held tightly in both hands, not to read from, but to hold, to keep. Her hands from trembling. She wore a simple blue button-down and black slacks. No makeup, no jewelry, no script. She sat, breathed in. The light above clicked on. The camera whirred to life, and for the first time she saw herself, unfiltered on the monitor across the room. Not the nurse who cared for a CEO, not the center of a media scandal, not the woman behind the foundation. Just Ariel, a 33-year-old black woman, once a girl who wanted to teach. Then a daughter who turned to medicine after a father's stroke. Nurse who'd sat through hundreds of night shifts beside strangers' beds, who'd once been asked if she was loving her way up the system, who had declined a proposal not because she didn't care, but because she wasn't ready to lose herself. And now, here she was, telling her story, in her own words, without armor, without a filter. I used to be afraid to say my name out loud, she began, her voice low but steady. Not because I hated it, but because I wasn't sure it would matter enough to be remembered. In the ICU, we're taught to contain. If someone dies, don't cry. If the shift is brutal, don't complain. If a patient lashes out, don't react. Professionalism means your pain stays silent. She looked straight into the camera. But no one tells you what to do when you become the subject of a story you didn't write. Her voice caught, just slightly. After his identity leaked, I wasn't a nurse anymore. I was the woman next to the hospital owner. I wasn't a caregiver. I was a PR liability. I wasn't Ariel. I was something people speculated about, judged, dissected, and then moved on from. She paused. Then, today is the first time I'm sitting here and saying, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to tell the story, accurately from the beginning. She spoke of being a med student working 3 jobs, of being evicted for defending a patient with HIV, of shaking the first time she entered the ICU, but still taking a stranger's hand and whispering, I'm here. We'll try together. She spoke of Landon, unconscious, sweating, gripped by something nameless in his sleep. How she'd held his hand too, not because she knew who he was, but because she didn't. And if I had known, she asked quietly, I would have done exactly the same, because I don't practice kindness by the value of who's receiving it. I do it because it's the only way I know how to survive in a system that rarely makes space for a heart. When the camera stopped, the young filmmaker didn't speak. She just walked over and wrapped her arms around Ariel. Ariel didn't cry, but something inside her, something buried deep, shifted, a subtle unfurling. She no longer doubted her voice. No longer waited for permission to use it. The video went live weeks later. No title punch, no hashtag, no campaign, just a single line. A woman who once thought her voice didn't matter, now speaks so no one else has to stay silent. And it spread. Not because it was viral, but because it was true. There is no voice like Ariel's, because it is the voice of someone who once endured in silence and now speaks not to reclaim anything, but to never again lose herself. The TEDx stage was smaller than Landon imagined, not the grandeur of an investor summit. No projected numbers, no graphs, no sleek video transitions, just a single spotlight and silence. The kind that waits, not to be impressed, but to be moved. He stood there in a dark suit, the top button of his shirt undone. No tie, no title card behind him, just a sentence glowing in white on the screen. I was once a patient, and I was saved by someone who didn't know my name. He leaned forward slightly, voice low but clear. I used to believe I controlled everything. Revenue, image, headlines. I built systems with precision. I led with clarity, and then I lost everything. I became, for a while, a man without a name, and I was cared for by someone who never asked for it. He paused. Let the words settle. In those days of fog and wires and stillness, there was a nurse. She didn't ask who I was. She didn't research my background. She didn't post about me or wonder what I could offer her. She wiped my forehead, held my hand, and sang soft old songs because she thought I might need to hear something gentle, a long silence. Not from nerves, but because the next words came not from memory, but from a place deeper. When I woke, she was still there, unchanged. She didn't treat me differently after I said my name. In a world where everyone wants something from you, she only wanted me to get better. Another pause. The audience leaned in. People say I protected her from the press. They say I was the powerful one. But the truth is, I didn't save her. She saved me. The first applause was soft. Then another, and another. Landon stepped back, nodded once, and walked off stage. The video spread quietly. No trailers, no hype, just a man speaking plainly about a hand that had once held his without needing to know what power it could hold. Media headlines didn't glamorize, they didn't dramatize. They simply told the truth. A CEO speaks not of leadership, but of the hand that kept him from falling. Gratitude, not glory. A man stands still for the woman who held him through silence. At the fund's small downtown office, Ariel watched the clip alone. She didn't cry, but something in her chest tightened. Not from longing. Not from pain, but from recognition. For once, she was not a symbol, not a story twisted into angles, not an accessory to someone else's journey. She was a human being, acknowledged, truthfully, publicly, without being rewritten. The next morning, on her desk, a small wooden box. No name, no flowers, no dramatic note. Inside, a printed copy of the speech and a handwritten letter in his familiar, deliberate scrawl. I'm not asking you to come back. I just want you to know. Your story is no longer forgotten, and if one day you choose to return to the hand you once held, it's still waiting. She folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer. No laptop, no meetings, no plans. Just her in stillness, her palm resting gently over her chest, where her heart beat steady, quiet, certain. And in that silence, a single truth finally settled. I'm not afraid to love again, not if the other person dares to live with this kind of truth. The rooftop of St. Augustine Hospital hadn't changed. The same two weathered wooden chairs still angled westward to catch the late afternoon light. The same row of herb pots planted each spring by a group of earnest med students. And the same tiny sign taped to the back railing. Private rest area for medical staff, a place to sigh without judgment. Ariel stepped out carrying 2 steaming paper cups of coffee. She still remembered how he liked it. Light cappuccino, no sugar, not out of old habit, but because today she had chosen to return to the place that once squeezed her heart tight, just to see if it might open again. He was already there. Back turned toward the door, hands in his pockets, shirt sleeves neatly rolled, his hair longer than the last time she'd seen him. Landon turned at the sound of her footsteps. Their eyes met. Not sharp, not searching, just still. And clear. She handed him the coffee. No words, he took it with both hands, as if receiving something fragile. You remembered how I take it? He asked. Hasn't changed, has it? Just the way I drink it, he said with a quiet smile. Slower now, with more gratitude. They sat in the old chairs, not touching. Between them, a space, wide enough to breathe, close enough to hear each other exhale. Ariel didn't look at him. Her gaze drifted toward the edge of the rooftop, where the fading sunlight spilled gently across the glass facade of the high-rise opposite. Do you remember the first song I ever sang? She asked. Bob Marley, he replied without pause. Redemption song. I didn't think anyone was listening. I just thought, if you never opened your eyes again, at least someone had once sung for you." "And I heard it," Landon said, his eyes never leaving her. "And that was bigger than waking up." Another beat of silence. A soft breeze stirred the air. Ariel's fingers touched the rim of her coffee cup as she rested her hand on the armrest. "I wrote you a letter," she said. Landon turned to her. Not a love letter, an invitation. She pulled a pale brown envelope from her jacket pocket. No name, no logo. He took it, opened it, read it quickly, then more slowly. Then nothing. "Program for Emotional Recovery in Critical Care Patients," he read aloud. "A therapeutic space using voice, music, and gentle contact for people just past the breaking point. And you want me to help you build it?" he asked quietly. Ariel nodded. "Not as a CEO, not as a donor, but as someone who's been saved, so you'll know what needs to be given back." Landon didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not with the eyes of a man hoping to rekindle something lost, but with the gaze of someone who had walked through death, been held back by a hand, and was now ready to hold it again. Not to keep it for himself, but to preserve the grace it once gave him. "I'll do it," he said, "and if you'll let me, I'd like to name the project after that song." Ariel smiled. "Redemption Room. A room for reclaiming what we thought we'd lost." They sat a while longer. No need to speak, no apologies, no promises, no rehashing of the past, only warm coffee. And something old, healing quietly through two people who had finally become new. On the opening day of Redemption Room, a rare sun broke through Chicago's fickle spring. No billboards, no fanfare, just a hand-carved wooden sign hung on the glass-paneled doors of the third floor. Once an old storage room, now transformed into a sanctuary of light, greenery, and soft chairs meant for conversations that didn't ask anyone to hide their feelings. There were no celebrity guests, only former patients, frontline nurses, and a handful of volunteers who had once lost someone, sitting side by side. No one above, no one below. No one asked to explain their pain. If you had ever hurt, this place belonged to you. Ariel stood at the far end of the room. No lab coat, just a white dress and a light cardigan. She moved quietly through each corner, adjusting a diffuser here, tugging a curtain there, fluffing a pillow, not to make everything perfect, but just enough so that people could breathe. Landon stood by the round table at the center of the room, where the first draft of their program lay, beside a board they'd co-written titled "Open Questions." Where in your body does the heaviness sit today? What helped you stand up the last time you fell? If you could speak to yourself at your lowest, what would you say? Once the program began, Ariel slipped away, back to the rooftop where it had all started. The same old chairs, the same slanted sunlight. But now, she stood there, with a heart that had healed. Landon followed a few minutes later. He didn't ask if she wanted to be alone, because this time he understood. Her silence didn't need to be broken, just accompanied, long enough to be understood. She turned toward him, a small box in her hand, no velvet, no flourish. Landon saw it and froze. And Ariel smiled. "Last time you knelt," she said softly, "and I wasn't ready. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't yet know how to love myself." She held the box out to him, unopened. "But today, I know who I am. I'm someone who's fallen, been dismissed, mislabeled, but I'm also someone who stood up, who learned to tell my own story, who knows now what love should never cost. She opened the box, a simple band of white gold inside, engraved with the words, "I chose." Fully. Landon looked at her, speechless. Because this wasn't a proposal. It was a declaration. She took his hand, the same one that had once gone cold, in a coma that had clutched hers in the fight to stay alive. Now, that hand was placed in hers, not to be held onto but to move forward together. Ariel smiled. Sunlight caught her lashes like falling gold. "Landon Hayes," she said, "I choose you, not because you were once my patient, not because you're a CEO, not because you stood up for me. I choose you, because you chose me when I couldn't. Choose myself. And now that I can, I choose you again." Landon pulled her into his arms. For the first time, in full daylight with no hiding, no fear, no need for explanation. Just two people and a love, beginning again in an old place, with hearts that had finally grown into who they were meant to be. Thank you for walking with Ariel and Landon through all 24 chapters. A journey not just of love, but of growth, kindness, and the quiet courage it takes to love without losing yourself. If this story touched you, like, share, or simply tell someone you believe needs the reminder. They are worthy, exactly as they are.